All right. Up next, we have the most awaited session for the day by Mr. by Dr. Jason Kelly, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks. Ginkgo is a synthetic biology company that programs cells for customers in the chemical, pharmaceutical, food, and energy industries. The company recently raised over $430 million in venture capital to expand their automated genetic engineering foundries. They have a $100 million joint venture with Bayer to develop microbes for self-fertilizing crops, a 160 million partnership with Roche to develop antibiotics, and with Motif for making animal-free protein ingredients. Prior to Ginkgo, Dr. Jason received a BS degree in chemical engineering and biology and a PhD in biological engineering, all from MIT. So, Dr. Kelly,
Hi, Ratika. Thanks for having me on.
thank you for coming. We have been eagerly waiting for you today.
I'm so excited. I have some slides that I can share. Should I just share my screen?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. Let's see. Everyone see those okay?
Yes, sir. We can see your slides now.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks so much for having me join. I first, I think I met Samir maybe more than 10 years ago now, or 8 to 10 years ago, when Ginkgo was maybe 15-person company. So he was a very early supporter of what we were trying to accomplish. So yeah, very thankful for his early support, and really delighted I was looking through the conference lineup. It's really an amazing set of folks you all have here, and I think it's really a testament to what's happening at the university. So yeah, really excited to speak today, and again, thanks to Samir for his early support and for inviting me.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, what I was going to do today was, I wanted to share a little bit. The area we operate in is a field called synthetic biology, and so I wanted to talk a bit about what synthetic biology is. I wanted to speak a bit about the pandemic, COVID-19, and how that's changing things when it comes to biotechnology, and then a little bit about what this might mean for people in the future that want to get into this area. So this was the cover of The Economist in April 2019. It said, "Redesigning Life: The Promise of Synthetic Biology." And so that same year in November, the White House here in the U.S. held a bioeconomy summit about synthetic biology. This is a follow-on from AI and quantum computing summits that they had earlier. So this is really, I think, an emerging area that governments and new students are thinking about kind of getting into. And so I want to just explain what it was. Before I get there, I'll just note this is the Economist cover from March of this year, highlighting the pandemic that we're all living through. And I think the balance and how we think about biology coming up is going to change quite a lot. And so I think it's a particularly important moment for people to be thinking about synthetic biology and what this technology might mean. Okay, so what is it? What is synthetic biology? This is my co-founder, Tom Knight. So this picture up here on the left, I really like. This was taken in the early 1970s at MIT. That's Tom on the left, so you can see the beard is still here, 50 years later. But that machine in the middle that Tom's standing in front of, that was what was called a mini computer at that time, okay? And so Tom had this history really building out the early versions of computing. And in the 1990s, he changed his focus into biology. And the reason he did that was he said DNA, as he saw it, was code, right? And it was digital, you know, as A, T, C's, and G's, not zeros and ones, but you could read that code with DNA sequencing and write it with DNA synthesis or DNA printing. And if you can read and write code and you have a machine to run it, which was how Tom saw a cell, that's programming. And so Tom, you know, to his credit, said, "Oh, maybe I can help." And he set up a wet lab in the computer science building and started taking undergraduate biology lab classes with the students at MIT. And so, you know, he shifted his focus. But his view was, we'll be able to program cells like we program computers, right? Because they run on digital code. And I think that's, if you only remember one thing about what synthetic biology is, that's it. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. And I want to highlight why I think it's important to have analogies like this. So this gentleman on the left here is Tom Watson Sr. He's really like the founding CEO of IBM. And he gave a speech back in the 30s, and this fellow Peter Drucker, who later was a very famous management consultant, interviewed him. And he said, well, he was very nice, and he began talking about something called data processing. And it made absolutely no sense to me. No one knew what data processing was. I took it back and told my editor, and he said Watson was a nut, and he threw the interview away, right? And what IBM was doing in that era, you know, they were inventing computing, and so people didn't know how to think about these things. And so what Tom Watson Sr. did was he said, we're going to process data like we process ore, right? He took the language of the time. We'll process this stuff and make it more valuable by putting it through big machines. And people were like, what are you talking about? Right. And that's kind of how we feel today with synthetic biology. We say, hey, we're going to program cells like we program computers. And people are like, what are you talking about? And so, but I do think it's important, and I'm going to push that analogy a little bit in the talk today, because I think it is one of the better ways to think about this technology. There's a lot of funding coming in. This is outdated data, but you know, the last couple of years have been more than this. This is really private sector venture capital. Is Synbio Beta is sort of the industry organization here in the U.S. For companies in this space. I encourage you to check out their website and subscribe to their mailing list if this is an area of interest for you. As was mentioned, Ginkgo's a lot bigger now than when we first met Samir. About 500 people, company's about $4.5 billion market cap. The lab behind me is here in Boston, where we have about 200,000 square feet of space. All right, so if we're programming cells, then we should have apps, right? You program your phone. There's gonna be an application. So first, I want to talk about what are the sort of apps that people can program with engineered cells. And so I'll give you my favorite example. So many of you might know about this. This is it's called the Impossible Burger, right? So this is a veggie burger that bleeds, right? And so you can see the red in the middle there. So how did they do this? It's been rolled out now nationwide in the U.S. As the Whopper. It's a popular burger brand here in the U.S. That red is actually hemoglobin, right? And so what Impossible has done is they've taken the gene for hemoglobin, which is what makes your blood red. They've taken a yeast cell like you would use to, brew beer, and they installed that code for hemoglobin into the yeast cell. And then you grow that cell up in a tank, and instead of beer coming out, hemoglobin comes out, except no animal. And so then you add that hemoglobin to a veggie burger, right? Made from plants, and it smells more, it tastes more like a traditional meat product here in the US. And so that's an example of a consumer-facing product where the real core technology is an engineered cell. There's a number of companies in this space. There's a company called Perfect Day that just raised another couple $100 million that's doing animal-free ice cream and milks. There's a company called Memphis Meats that's doing this with chicken. And so, there's a lot of activity in this area of plant-based foods and whether you can improve the taste and make new products using programmed cells. The other area another area would be in consumer good materials. So this is there's a couple companies, Zoa and Milo, that are making leather replacements. So this is again to make an animal-free leather. They're really focusing on sort of the high-end leather market to start. And these actually, the ones from Milo, are made from mushrooms, right? And so you can again. I think you will see more and more consumer-facing products as the cost of engineering biology goes down, which I'll talk about, we'll start having biotechnology embedded in them. This was mentioned in the introduction. Ginkgo has a $100 million joint venture with Bayer Crop Science to engineer microbes to produce fertilizer for crops, right? So the way that we get fertilizer today, I was a chemical engineer, right? So there's a process called Haber-Bosch. It's like the pride of chemical engineering. You pull nitrogen out of the air, because the atmosphere is 70% nitrogen gas. You pull it through a big chemical plant. You burn natural gas, about 4% global greenhouse gas, goes to making about $80 billion a year of ammonia, okay? And you bag it up, you ship it to farmers, they put it on the field, half goes to the crop, half ends up in the river. You get a local environmental problem and you get a global greenhouse gas problem, but we all get to eat, right? So fertilizers are important. So certain crops, like legumes, like soybeans, don't need nearly as much fertilizer as things like corn or wheat or rice. And the reason is on their roots are microbes running Haber-Bosch. So they're pulling nitrogen out of the air and producing that fertilizer for the crop. And but corn, wheat, and rice, which are half of global fertilizer usage, they don't have these microbes. So what we're doing for Bayer is we're saying, well, let me read the code of the microbes that grow on the soybeans and then print it out, redesign it, and put it into the microbes that live on corn so that we can see if we can make the corn self-fertilize in a similar way to the way soybeans do. And so that's an example of that's more of a global impact and food security rather than sort of a consumer goods type application of this technology. There's also many, many applications in health. This is one I like. It's a company called Synlogic. They're doing engineered gut bacteria for the treatment of errors of metabolism. So these are people who can't degrade a certain type of food. Instead, could you add the missing human genes that people have in these diseases to the bacteria in their gut, and then have those bacteria produce the enzymes for the person? So it's an example of a living medicine, like a live cell that would be the drug that you would take. Similarly, in this area is a company called Cell Design Labs that was acquired last year. And what I like about this is, it says, we're excited about, this is the company that acquired them, Gilead. We're excited about the potential of the SynNotch and Throttle technology platforms. And what these are not actually like end drugs. They're actually genetic programs that Cell Design Labs developed that actually make it easier to express certain types of genetic therapies in cells. And so companies are starting to get bought for like the genetic programming tools they have, even before they would have a drug, which I think is an interesting demonstration of how this is getting to be more and more like almost like coding a computer. Obviously, on everyone's mind, the mRNA therapeutics that recently have been getting approvals in the UK and I think soon here in the US. From companies like Moderna. I'll talk about this in a minute, but we were able to help Moderna optimize their manufacturing process earlier this year. Those are vaccines, which are a piece of genetic code, mRNA, delivered to a person to program the cells in their body to express a little piece of the virus and turn their immune system on. So it's really a genetic program as a drug. It's very exciting, new type of vaccine, but one of the most powerful applications of synthetic biology clearly today. Okay, so those are just a few, and one of the things I'll highlight is that's a wide range of different things, right? It's from leather bags to SARS-CoV-2 vaccines to fertilizers, right? And I think that's, I'll touch on that later, but the applications for this I think are going to end up being very, very broad. Okay, so why is it happening now? Why is the White House having a synthetic biology summit? Why is all this funding coming in? And to explain this to you, I want to go a little bit deeper and talk about the technology a bit. Okay, so I said, Tom's vision was we're going to program a cell like a computer. And I gave you this analogy why it's important to think of things in sort of analogous to other things we understand. So I'll nerd out for a minute and talk about how you program a computer. Okay, so the way you program a computer, if you were a software developer, and I'm sure many people on this call are, is you use what's called an IDE, an integrated development environment. Okay, and an IDE contains three things: a code editor, a compiler, and a debugger. And the way you write software is you open the code editor, which is a window on your screen, and you type human readable language, right? Like here on the left. If this, for that, you write computer code, right? And then you hit compile. And the compiler is a translator, right? It turns human readable code into machine code, into zeros and ones that the computer can read, right? The processor can read. And then the processor runs, right? And then the third element comes up, which is the debugger. And the debugger says, yeah, this is broken, that's broken, that's broken. You should really fix it. You go back to the code editor, you make some changes, you hit compile again, bugger comes up, and you go around and around that loop, you and a team of developers, thousands of times until you're like, I'm done with this program. It's bug-free. Never is, but it's bug-free, and you ship it. And it goes up on Amazon Web Services, or it goes to an app on your phone. Okay? That's the process for writing computer code. Exactly analogous to what we're doing in the facilities behind me here in Boston when we program genetic code, right? So what is our, first off, our code editors are terrible, right? So in computer programming today, you write human readable words. But actually, when my co-founder Tom Knight was back doing computers, he wrote bit code. So he would have to get in there and actually think about the zeros and ones because it was that era of computing. It was so early on. That's where we are with code editors today. We really don't have higher level. We don't have a Java or anything like that. We're really writing ATCs and Gs directly, okay? And then we hit compile, right? Well, a compiling technology is DNA synthesis, okay? And DNA synthesis means I go on a computer, I type ATC GGG, I hit print, and then out of a machine, say here in Boston, or we have a partnership with a company called Twist out in California, that piece of DNA gets printed, right? And so you get exactly the ATC GGG that you want, all right? And that's the compiling. Now you've got that code, and then you install it into the genome of a cell using molecular biology to open the genome and put it in. And now you have a cell that has your code in it that you could go run and see what happens in the debugging step, okay? But this compiling step is particularly important, and I'll highlight the cost to write DNA has been falling substantially over the last 15, 20 years. So back when I was in grad school at MIT in the early 2000s, we were paying tens of dollars per letter of DNA. And today it's pennies per letter to print that DNA out. And Ginkgo is the largest user of this technology in the world. About 20 to 25% of the long pieces, the gene length pieces of DNA printed worldwide are designed by us. The other technology, just to mention it, that's been improving very quickly is reading DNA. So we've gone from the first human genome being sequenced back in 2000, costing about $100 million, to a genome today being somewhere between $100 and $1,000 for that genome. So we've seen almost a million-fold cost reduction in the cost to read DNA over the last 15 to 20 years. And just to put that in perspective, the dotted line at the top there, that's Moore's law. That's how fast computers get better every year. So we have been, in reading and writing DNA, improving at or better than the rate that computers have been improving for the last 20 years. So this is one of the reasons that this is happening today. The tools are getting so much better to program biology that we are able to open all these new applications. And I won't get into this too much today, but debugging a cell is complicated, right? So if I've made a change to the cell's genome, I now need to grow that cell in the lab, open it up, and look inside and see what happened based on my changes. So that usually means using lots of high-end analytical equipment, mass specs, genome sequencers, and so on to see what's happening inside that cell. That's our version of debugging. And just so you have a sense of sort of where the direction we're headed and why we're able to improve costs on the debugging and the molecular biology, it's because we are applying increasingly sophisticated laboratory automation to do the work of compiling and debugging cells. Okay, and this is a picture of our newest facility, Bioworks 5 here in Boston. And we've been roughly at Ginkgo tripling the output of our automated facilities and having the cost per operation each year for the last 5 years. And so this is like making cars or making microchips. The more of them you make, the cheaper they get. That's what we've been doing for compiling and debugging genetic code. The more of it we do, the cheaper it's been getting. And that by companies like Ginkgo and others, and places like Twist for DNA printing and Illumina for DNA reading, the cost driving down as a function of scale is one of the key reasons this is all happening today, and that I expect the next 10 years to be really the most promising time in the history of this industry, because those curves are continuing to go, and so there should be many more applications waiting. The other thing I should mention in the technology area, as many of you have probably heard of, is a technology called CRISPR. And I'll just point out that biology is crazy, right? So everything I just mentioned to you before about reading and writing DNA and all the automation, that's very traditional engineering, right? Like I've got teams of automation engineers and software people that work really hard every year to make it a little cheaper and a little larger scale to like do some molecular biology. But a lot of our tools for, say, editing genomes or what, the things we do in the lab, we don't invent them. We actually find them in nature. And so occasionally something comes along like CRISPR, where someone wanders off, into the woods, does some biology research, and finds a brand new technology that is 1,000 or 10,000 times better than the current option on the market. And that's what happened with CRISPR. The ability to find a location in a complex organism's genome, so think like a plant or an animal or a human, and locate a spot in the genome and open it up so that you can put in new code. We were terrible at doing that before CRISPR. Like with plant engineering, you literally would use what was called a gene gun and shoot gold nanoparticles with DNA stuck to them, and they would hit the DNA of the plant and insert into the genome at random. And that was the best we could do, right? So imagine if you were trying to write computer code and you just shot zeros and ones at random into the Windows operating system and sort of hope they hit a spot that was safe for them to land, right? That was literally how we did plant genetic engineering by and large. And so CRISPR really improves that, not by virtue of any engineering or efforts, but by scientific discovery. And so who knows, right? Those things can also pop up occasionally in biological engineering. There are many more tools out there in nature waiting to be discovered. I'm sure of that. The other thing I want to mention as to why this is happening today, that whole automated facility is what we call our foundry. The other thing that is growing exponentially is what we call code base. And this basically means all the data associated with engineering cells and biology that builds up over time as we do more and more projects like this. And so, Ginkgo today has characterized more protein sequences than are in UniProt, which is the big global database, as an example. So as we automate this, we also start to generate a better knowledge of how to engineer biology. Right? It's almost like the theory of programming computers, right? And so that's the other thing that you should keep in mind as to why this technology is getting better fast. Okay, so I want to highlight, I mentioned, we're living through really a global biological event in COVID-19. It's obviously hit us very hard here in the US. I know it's hit hard in India as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about why synthetic biology, how it can be useful for events like this, and why I'm sort of excited that these platforms are getting built so that these sort of things like COVID-19 could be more preventable in the future. So back in March and April, when it was clear this was not going to be a contained pandemic, Ginkgo opened our platform up for free for folks that were doing therapeutics and vaccine work here in the US for up to $25 million of platform work. We did a partnership with Moderna, which I'll mention in a minute, to optimize their manufacturing. We also synthesized a bunch of open reading frames. So these are basically to make plasmids that we could give to researchers freely who are studying the disease. We did that in partnership with IGEM. That was using DNA writing, using DNA reading. We sequenced the genome of the virus over thousands of different samples from positive samples collected in different locations here in the US. That can then give information to public health officials that are trying to understand how the pandemic is moving around. So by looking at the genome sequences of an infectious disease, you can sort of track, did this infection come from this state, or was it internal, or so on. We did a partnership with a company called Toscent to try to help discover new therapeutic antibodies. This would be for therapeutics for the disease rather than a vaccine. And then we did this large project with Moderna that went really well to optimize the manufacturing process for producing their plasmid DNA, and that would be then converted to mRNA. And so, and that's an example where we could take the infrastructure we already had that usually was doing many projects, and for 3 months just pointed exclusively at this project with Moderna. And so I think this is one of the things coming up as we build these big kind of automated facilities for doing biotech. They should be able to be repurposed in an emergency to do work like this, particularly if we start to design them with that in mind, which we have not been doing up till now, to be clear, because I think people didn't appreciate how big a threat emerging infectious diseases could still be in 2020 rather than 1918. And now we know. So I do think we'll be worldwide much better prepared next time. The other key technology we've been working on is lowering the cost for doing testing so that ideally you could use it to test people without symptoms in advance of a vaccine, so that you could use testing as a form of containment of SARS-CoV-2. And so we launched a new brand called Concentric. We work with therapeutics and vaccine companies. We were awarded a grant from the National Institutes of Health here in the US, and we're continuing to do this really with a focus coming up on workplaces and K through 12 schools here in the US. Towards that end, just last week, the US, we announced that we were approved for a $1.1 billion loan from the US government to scale this up. That's to scale it up in the US, but it's also to build out international capabilities. So we're working with partners on how could we take this sort of testing technology we have and put it into a mobile type lab setup that then could be deployed internationally in an easier manner. And so this is something I'm really excited about, because one of the things I would like to do in the context of COVID is see these sorts of synthetic biology and DNA reading technologies be more distributed internationally, and ideally running through our platform here at Ginkgo so that we can speed up the rate of adoption of these technologies. And so that's something that's coming. We have not, really announced that yet, but that's in the wings. Okay, so that was what I wanted to say about what we've been doing. The last year for us here at Ginkgo has really been an enormous focus on response to the pandemic. So I wanted to highlight it, and I think it is a unique moment right now for biotechnology, and I think you've seen the synthetic biology sort of step up in this scenario, obviously with the mRNA vaccines, but also I think with other technologies as well, like testing and therapeutics coming also. Okay, so the other thing I want to mention is sort of how do we go out and engage with folks that might want to start new companies, right? Pursue new cell apps, because Ginkgo's business is really to be that compiler and debugger. We want to be that IDE. We're not a programmer of cells. We work with a company like Bayer for the agriculture work, or we have a bunch of customers in the food space and so on, Roche and antibiotics and things like that. There's going to be a big market here, right? So this was a report from McKinsey in the US that there's going to be a $4 trillion market ultimately for engineered cell apps. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So how does Ginkgo fit into that ecosystem of companies that are going to get developed? And we see two pieces. One is technology platform. So we can print DNA cheaper than if you tried to do it yourself. We can run those experiments on our robots cheaper than if you were to do it yourself. And so we want folks that are developing apps to use our platform to develop them, just like you would use Amazon Web Services to run your website rather than set your own server up. So that's one of the ways, is technical. But if you kind of think of it like, I like the analogy of a movie studio, like all that technical stuff is like the cameras and the movie lot and all that capital investment that makes it, easier and faster and cheaper to shoot a new movie at Paramount than do it yourself, right? But the other thing that they have at a movie studio is access to capital, access to actors, distribution relationships with the movie theaters, all the other things that if someone wants to make a movie also you need, right? And so we've been working on that as well, so that folks that are really passionate to develop a new cell app can get access to things like, new capital and infrastructure. So we announced a partnership with 2 startup incubators, Y Combinator out in Silicon Valley, which we were the first biotech company to do Y Combinator 6 years ago, but now they have many. And also here in Boston, an incubator called Petrie, where if you are getting into those programs and starting up a new company, you can actually access our platform instead of having to build your own lab. That was something we started last year. And then we also announced a investment fund called Ferment Fund with $350 million that is backing new spin out companies on top of our platform. And so we have now had a couple of these, but one is Motif Foodworks, which is like an animal-free protein company. We also announced about a month ago Alonia, which is a bioremediation company. And I think next year we're going to actually start many smaller companies in this space. So this is a way for new companies to get started and not need to build a lab right out of the gate. So I'm going to end with a few slides that I show when I give talks out in Silicon Valley, which I do a fair bit. So I like to show this slide and say like, hey, look, these are some of the most sophisticated devices that humans have invented, right? And so the question is, what's the most sophisticated device on the table, right? And the answer is the houseplant, right? And the answer is like, obviously the houseplant, right? Like the houseplant is self-repairing, right? So like imagine if you cracked your iPhone screen and over the next week, the thing fixed itself, right? Like we'd be hailing, Tim Cook as a god, right? It's self-assembling, right? You plant a seed and you add air, water, and sunlight, and this thing builds itself, this plant, with no manufacturing infrastructure whatsoever, right? Okay, it's self-replicating. You make one and then it goes off and makes copies of itself. Imagine if the iPhone did that, what that would do to Apple's margins, right? And then finally, it's renewable. When you're done with it, you just throw it on the ground and it melts away into the environment in a completely benign way, right? And so that's at like at a macro level. This is by far the most sophisticated tech on the table. But what about at a micro level? Right. So you might have seen these little guys, if you looked at a drop of pond water in elementary school or something. And I want to draw your attention to that little hair that you see, around at the end of that bacteria in the water. Okay. And here's a close up of that little hair up in the top. Okay. And what those are is they're called flagella. They're basically little propellers that sit on the back of a bacteria and spin like this and let it swim through the water. All right. And I want to draw your attention to where that tail meets the body of the microbe. And at that junction is this device here on the left. It's called a flagellar motor. It's a 35,000 RPM rotary motor. All right. The red disc spins inside the blue disc. All right. Now to give you a sense of scale, lower right corner, that's a current generation Intel semiconductor chip. Okay. And you can see that 40 nanometer scale bar, and those two things there are 2 pieces of silicon that make up a transistor, okay? 40 nanometer scale bar. In the middle, that's an electron micrograph of that flagellar motor. Same 40 nanometer scale bar. So in the same area where Intel, with a $5 billion manufacturing facility, is able to make 2 dumb hunks of silicon, biology is building a 30,000 RPM rotary motor, placing thousands of atoms in 3 dimensions for free in one of the puddles outside right now, right? So where is that level of molecular manufacturing on Intel's roadmap? 100 years out? 500 years out? Right? We have no idea how to build things like this. Biology does this today for free, right? Okay, so if you put those 2 things together, you've got nanoscale precision. Biology places atoms, okay, better than our most sophisticated manufacturing like semiconductors. And thanks to self-replication and self-assembly, we have things like jungles and industrial agriculture. Biology makes more physical stuff every year than any other industry, right? So it's better at the small stuff and it's better at the large stuff. So why don't we use it to manufacture everything? And the answer is, yeah, we're obviously going to end up using biology to manufacture everything, right? What we just lack today is the ability to program it to make all the things we want. And that's what synthetic biology is doing. It's unlocking this latent potential in biology by allowing us to program it to make all the things we need. And I'll make one last plug. You know, if you're interested in this area, I think one of the best things you can get involved in is a competition called IGEM. It's the International Genetically Engineered Machines Competition. There's a number of teams at schools in India. It is basically students spending the summer learning how to program cells and then showing up for a bunch of judges in November and presenting the cells that they've programmed just in a friendly competition. And it's now hundreds and hundreds of teams all over the world. This is a picture of myself and the other founders of Ginkgo back when we did this in, I guess probably 2006 or something, 2008, I'm not sure, 6. And we had programmed cells to, that made them smell like mint when they were growing, and when they stopped growing, they smelled like bananas. And so fun projects, and also a really great way to learn about this technology. I highly encourage you, if you're interested in this tech, to look up IGEM, IGEM.org, and find a team. So that's my email up there. I really enjoyed sharing a little bit about Ginkgo, what we're doing, sort of how COVID-19 is impacting synthetic biology and how synthetic biology is stepping up in that space, and a little bit of how this might be applied in the future. So thanks a lot for the time, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
That the past half an hour, I suppose we have been here for half an hour with you, and I don't think I've enjoyed a session as almost as much as I did this one, because the COVID vaccines is the discussion about COVID vaccine is something that we're all truly into, given the past developments in the industry, and you just keep mentioning about them, you keep explaining it to us, and now the wheels of our brains are just turning and turning and turning, and there's no stopping, I suppose. All right, so we already have questions in the chat box. Would you like me to read them out for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can. Yeah. I see where it is now also. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. Pick which one you want me to do.
Okay. This one is from Gandhi. Hello, sir. I read about Ginkgo most often. Your work is so fascinating. How did you come up with an idea of designing organisms?
Yeah, I mean, it was really back at MIT in grad school, thanks to Tom Knight and also a couple other folks like Drew Endy at MIT and Pam Silver at Harvard, who were, and actually George Church was around then too. I saw he was on the list of folks that spoke with you all. You know, it was a group of a mix of biologists and then also engineers, right, who said, hey, you know, this stuff is programmable. Why don't we program it, right? And then when they got involved with it, like people like Tom, they said, oh my gosh, the tools to program it are so terrible. You know, it's going to take forever to do anything. And so then we all became like tool nerds, really focused on how do we make it cheaper and easier and faster, right? And yeah, so that's kind of what gets us going. Many other people are more inspired by a certain application, right? They're like, I really want to impact climate change, or I really want to, you know, have an impact on this disease or whatever. And that is great too, you know, but what really got us excited was always making it easier to do it, yeah, in the first place. And then other people could then develop the apps, yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Yug asking, how are you managing GMO? How are you managing the GMO issue when it comes to developing a flavor?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so you know, this is one of the things we actually spend the most time on here at Ginkgo, if you can believe it, is thinking about how do you engage with the public about new technology, and particularly new technology in genetic engineering. It has not had a good history, right? And you know, so I'll give you an example of one of the things that we did in this area. So about 4 years ago, I wrote a New York Times editorial that said, I run a GMO company and I think we should label GMOs. right? And this was in the middle of the labeling, when the Congress here in the US was debating having a national GMO labeling law in the US, which ultimately they did decide to do. And that was not really industry opinion at that time, right? And our view was, if we're really going to end up applying this stuff all over the economy, you can't hide it from people, right? The foundation of that needs to be transparency and getting people excited about having GMOs in their products, right? And you're like, how could they get excited? Well, the kind of person that reads a label is the kind of person that cares how their product is made. And if you think about what it means to move manufacturing to biology, it means it's going to be renewable. It means it's going to be more clean manufacturing, because you don't need, manufacturing facilities. It self-assembles, right? Like, all the people who are going to get excited about bioengineering are exactly the kind of people that look at a label, right? And so we felt like that really we had to start from a base of transparency to build trust and then go from there. And so that's one of the key things we think is important, is being transparent. And you'll see that if you go to the Impossible Foods website, they explain how they make that hemoglobin. They show you pictures of the fermenters and all that. I think that's exactly the right way to do it. And then the second thing is you give people magical products, right? Like, you give them a leather bag that didn't have to kill an animal, right? And they say, oh my gosh, yes, I'll take it, right? I'll take those GMOs if it makes a positive impact in my life. And you can see that with therapeutics. About half of your therapeutic drugs today are made with GMOs, right? No one really fights that, right? No one fights that human insulin is made with a GMO. Well, that's because the value is so apparent. And so I think those are some of the ways, but it is going to be a long trust building exercise, because there's been a deficit.
Okay. Next up, we have Anushka asking, that was so great to hear, sir. Is there any program for students and fellows to become a part of Ginkgo Bioworks?
Yes. Yeah, there absolutely is. Yeah, if you go to our website, there's a careers page, but we have like a Padawan program, which is a internship for people that want to go to grad school but want to spend some time in industry before. So a lot of folks will do that right out of school on the technology side. And then we're hiring all the time. So please do apply.
All right. Next up, we have Pratik. How was Ginkgo's initial journey as a venture? How did you grow to be what Ginkgo is today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started the company in 2008 out of grad school. We were 4 students who had just graduated, and then a professor who was still at that time at MIT, Tom. We had no product in mind. We wanted to make this platform. And unlike in software, where it's become very common today for people to start software companies right out of college or grad school, in biotech, that never happens. So there was no way we were going to get venture funding. Tom gave us a little bit of money, I think like $100,000, and we started buying used lab equipment. We would wait until labs would shut down at MIT and go. They would send an email out saying, hey, anyone in the department that wants glassware, the such and such lab is shutting down, you can go get it. And then they would say, hey, anyone at the school who wants it for their lab, you can go get it. And then finally they would say, this stuff is getting thrown out, so if you want it, you can just take it. And then we would go over there and fill cardboard boxes with all this lab junk and pile it up in Tom's lab. And so we spent 5 years where we didn't have any venture capital, and really we bootstrapped, ran the company cheaply, and applied for government grants. So probably the first 10 or $15 million over that period came from government funding, and the company was maybe between 5 and 20 people during that period of time. And then we built up. We got our first commercial customers, including Samir. And then at that point, we applied to Y Combinator, which was an incubator in Silicon Valley. And they, companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and all these software companies have done Y Combinator. And we applied because we felt like we were programming, right? Like it felt like we were kind of like a software company. So we applied, we were the first biotech. And then that went really great because we had customers we could show that the technology was being valued in the market, and we could point to the technology progress over the last 5 years. And at that point, we could raise capital. So we did about 6 months later a $45 million fundraise, and then we just kind of kept going from there. We used the capital to be bigger, which let us raise more money, and you know, in the last 6 years, have raised another 900 million. So that was very much the begin. You know, it was 5 years of running small and building technology and trying to find out where we could apply it in the market, and then the last 5 years bringing in growth capital through traditional venture and equity.
All right. Okay.
But people should start, you know, I think what's interesting, what I found out was that if you do start the company, then it starts to get a life of its own, right? So I've almost forgotten about this now because it's been so long, but like, I remember like in that first couple years, I personally, like Jason, as a recent grad student who would have then gone to say do a postdoc, could never have applied for a big grant from the Department of Energy in the US. But Ginkgo Bioworks could apply, right? Because Ginkgo Bioworks, even though at that time it was like 8 people, was like pulling together all the credibility of those 8 people. And it was like one, you know, like it had more credibility than I did personally. And so there is like power in getting together with some people and like committing to try to do something, because the thing you create becomes more credible and powerful than any of you individually. And then it can go somewhere, right? Like it has a better shot of going somewhere than you do by yourself. And so that was really, even though it went slow for 5 years, it always felt like we were getting better, and we were better together than we would have been if we had done it ourselves. You know, and obviously it's worked out, but even if it hadn't, I think those 5 years were a really great experience anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have Bube asking, how can design appropriate synthetic biology? What is your opinion about design appropriate synthetic biology?
Yeah, we love. Yeah, so we're very fortunate at Ginkgo. There's a woman, Christina Agapakis, who's our creative director, and I actually know Christina because she was in Pam Silver's lab at Harvard 12 years ago, back when we were in grad school, and then we were very fortunate to have her join the company now, probably 8 years ago, and she runs. She started for us now 4 years ago an artist and designer in residence program at Ginkgo. So if you look on the website, you can find this also, and people apply for it, and then we select a artist in residence, and they come out. Right now with COVID, they can't, but normally they would come out for 3 or 4 months and be in the lab with the scientists and have that interaction where our scientists get to learn more about this person's art and design, and they get to learn more about the science of synthetic biology. And it has been like awesome, like a really cool experience. Our first, I'll give you one example. Our first artist in residence was this woman, Natsai, and she did this thing where she would take, like, if you want to grow bacteria, you use like a petri dish, right? Like you've seen these little, you know, dish with like Jello in it. And so she would make a giant petri dish, like, you know, like as big as a table. Okay. And she would put down bacteria on it that produce pigment. Okay. Because, you know, you've seen all these like bright colored bacteria, like in like hot springs and things like that. So she would put these different colored bacteria on the plate. And then she would put a piece of fabric, like a silk, on top of it. And the bacteria would grow into the fabric. And then she'd wash, and then she'd leave it there for a couple of weeks, and then wipe it down, clear it off, and they would have dyed the fabric in the pattern where they grew. And so every one of these she did was like a unique new pattern, because biology inherently is diverse, right? Like it never makes the same thing twice. And so she had this like, it was anyways, like very, and it taught me about like, you know, even on the business side, it taught me she can't make that fabric the same 2 times. Right. And if you compare that to how we do traditional manufacturing, it's hard to not make the same shirt every time. right? Like it starts to get expensive the more you try to add customization into human manufacturing, but every tree is unique. So biology makes customization inexpensive, right? And so that's a good learning. There's like a good business learning that I took away from this interaction with Natsai, this artist and designer. So I think it's a great idea. And the only other thing I'll say about it is, every substrate that humans gain the ability to control or program, in our words here, becomes a substrate for art and design. And so one of the things I'm most excited about is, biology is beautiful, right? So as we get better at being able to program it and design it, the things people are going to do is going to be incredible, right? So one of the things I'm most excited about is that interface between art and design and synthetic biology. And again, I'd encourage folks that are interested in that to check out that IGEM competition. I know the school here did it. I think it's a great, really, that also is a chance to engage at that interface.
Okay, next up, Unnati says, Maria, thanks for such an excellent presentation. The flagellar movement that we learned, you gave a new insight into its molecular mechanism. Thank you very much. Then we have Bhuve again. How do you bring those GMO topics to the public?
Yeah, I think I would just say what I said before. I think it's a base of transparency, plus getting people excited about the potential, right? So I think, for example, COVID-19 is a great one, believe it or not, right? Like we're, here in the US, all about to get, transfected with mRNA, right? Like your cells are going to get a piece of code put in them that's going to express a little piece of a protein and turn your immune system on. Like that's a great opportunity to teach everybody how that works, right? It's not mystery at this point how a cell reads RNA and does things, right? And the more people understand that, the less they're afraid of it, right? And so I think any opportunity we can get where biology has a chance to do something magical for people, whether that's make a better chicken nugget or cure a pandemic disease, those are great opportunities to help people understand GMOs better.
So something we should definitely take. All right, Sentinel asks, do you develop cell apps first and find potential market users, or do you seek for a market need first and then develop essential cell apps?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so from my preferred situation would be Ginkgo doesn't develop cell apps, right? I just want to be the integrated development environment, the IDE, and I want all of you to develop cell apps, right? So you would come and say, I really think we need a engineered cell for whatever, right? Wastewater cleanup. Great, right? And you would go raise some capital, build a team, and then use our infrastructure to program that cell, right? Just like Amazon Web Services doesn't come up with every website idea. Many other people come up with websites and then they just use Amazon to make it easy to bring those to scale. That's how we want to operate. So ideally, I don't figure it out. Today we still have to figure it out a little bit, but in the future, hopefully it's mostly other people.
Okay. Claire says, yes, technology, genetic engineering and synthetic biology will give humans a certain amount of power to redesign life according to their needs. But ask, what will happen when life decides to retain its order back as an earlier speaker said, that life always gets a way to get things back into order.
Yeah. You see the T-Rex behind me? Yes. So, my favorite movie on this is Jurassic Park, right? Which is, the famous line is life will find a way, right? And I actually think this is a really, really important point. So we can program cells like we program computers, but cells are not computers. Like a computer is a big clock, right? It does exactly what we ask it to do every time. We understand every little bit because every piece of it was designed by humans. That's not biology. And I don't think biology is actually ever going to get there, personally. I think some people kind of want to turn biology into a clock or a computer. It's not going to happen. It's been 4 billion years of life finding a way. and sort of building up an independent, complex technology infrastructure that was not designed by humans and absolutely has a life of its own. And we have the ability to get in there and make some changes and run some code, but we will not control it. And so we need to figure out how to work with it, right? You know, and I think it starts with having the humility of knowing that life will find a way, right? And that it will never be a clock for you. And that means you need to operate differently and think about it responsibly and so on. And it's going to be a journey over the next 50 years to figure out how we do that. But I think the first step is just admitting that, yeah, life will find a way.
On that note, Bube asked about his earlier question. He just follows up with his earlier question. What is your opinion about classic designers that want to do design with synthetic biology?
I don't know I'm not sure I know what it means by classic designer. But the folks that we work with in the design residency program would be, you know, our most recent ones are architects. You know, Natsai was a clothing designer. So I'm not sure.
We have a question from Amit Yadav. Will you be collaborating with Riddle Incubator for Indian startups?
We don't now, but you know, if they emailed me, we could look into it. Yeah.
Definitely going to ask them to email you now. All right. Okay, give me a minute. Next up, we have Pratik. Well, what is your answer to people, especially lawmakers in the European Union, who say don't mess with self-replication machines for the fear of uncontrolled biocontamination? Self-replicating.
Yeah, and again, I think this is sort of the life will find a way topic. Look, like I said, I think it starts from admitting that we will not interact with biology like we interact with computers or industrial engineering, like a factory. That is not going to be our relationship with biology. And for those that do farming and agriculture and gardening, they already know this, right? You know, like it is a messier interaction, right? Like the right way to think about it is like gardening. It's like it's going to be a co-relationship. So I think that's the start. But I would say to a lot of those folks, a lot of what the people who get worried about that are concerned about, actually, like the root of it is what we've done since the Industrial Revolution, right? It's that the way we make things, the things we need on this planet, is a process of like digging a hole in the ground, pulling out some materials, running them through a factory, making some disposable stuff, using it, and then throwing it in another hole and hoping this first hole never runs out. And that process is fundamentally unsustainable. And the only manufacturing process I know of that has a track record of sustainability with this planet is the 4 billion year track record of biology. It like self-replication is part of the magic, right? And so that if we embrace that, I think we can get over the Industrial Revolution and land on an actual sustainable way to make all the things we need to support the people on this planet. And so to me, we got to figure it out.
Okay. Then we have this question by Bhavna. How did you sustain Ginkgo without funding for 5 years?
So yeah, well, number one, we were cheap, so we didn't pay ourselves much, and we got all our equipment used and from dumpster diving. And then we did apply for government grants, and so we were able to get in some sort of patient R&D capital from the U.S. government, like Department of Energy and DARPA. Like I said, maybe probably like $5 to $10 million over that period. So that was a big help.
Okay. We have more questions coming up. We have a question by Neha. So many questions. They just keep coming.
You have one here about what do you think cities, communities, especially in India, should focus on to foster synthetic biology innovation that you see like in Boston. Also love the Grow magazines. That's great. Yeah, we have these magazines called Grow. If you go to growbyginkgo.com, you can see them. And they're really meant to focus on engaging with the public on genetic engineering. So I'm glad people like them. Like honestly, I personally think it is. I think that's a tough question because it's a mix of things that make places become little technology hubs. I think about this a lot because I'm in Boston, not Silicon Valley, and and so we have our own sort of ecosystem here, different than the tech companies. And the very base of it is obviously people, right? So it's like having a certain set of people who actually care about and are passionate about that particular area that like are all around each other. Now the question is like, what are their jobs? Right? Like they got to be able to stick around, and so it does take time to build it up. So I don't have like a magic bullet there, other than to say, getting even a small group of people. Like if I look at synthetic biology back in 2005, it was maybe 50 people in the Boston area that really cared about it. We did some damage even with that many people. It doesn't need to be a huge group, but I think getting a group of people together that are passionate about a similar thing is the first step.
Okay. Last question for the day by Mr. Mehfooz. What's your point on artificial intelligence integrating with biology?
Yeah, I mean, here's the best way to think about it. I think you can think of it as artificial intelligence. I think the easier way to think about it is when you debug a computer program, that process runs on the computer virtually, and so you're essentially like you run a simulation that tells you what works and doesn't in the code. Our ability to do that with biology right now is extremely limited. To say, I wanted to put this AATTGGG in the cell, what will happen as a result? The only way to find out is to put that in the cell and actually grow it and check right now, for the most part. If it's a small enough piece of biology, you can use simulation to get an idea a little bit. And so like, there's some recent news, Google did some good protein simulation. Those are great tools, but like, that's one piece of a protein in a cell of hundreds of thousands of proteins bumping into each other in a haphazard way. Like, our ability to actually simulate what's going on is bad. Now, you can use computational tools to help you design. So I think prediction of what's going to happen is horrible, but if you told me I need you to design 100,000 genetic designs, Jason, I'm not going to design them all in my head. I'm going to use like CAD tools, like computer aided design. So think more like AutoCAD, right? Like, and so those are going to be very helpful, and AI can help there actually. But simulation, I think, is still probably, decades away from making a very big impact.
Okay. Before I say anything else, I'd like to invite Samir sir to say a few words. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I just want to thank Jason. It just was a fantastic talk, Jason. It was incredible, Jason. You opened all our minds. Thank you so much. You gave us such an incredible experience and exposure to what the world of synthetic biology is doing. It's, as you said, it's at the very beginning, like the zeros and the ones of the computer code of the 70s and early 80s. I actually did some zeros and ones myself. It's great to see. I met Jason, as he says, about 7-8 years ago. And as he says, when he was a team of 15, 20, 50 people. And I saw the incredible stuff they were dreaming up. And I make it a point to visit what he calls his foundry every November in Boston. And he's always gracious enough to show me around and show me foundry number 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. And it's just incredible to see where he's going. So Jason, we are actually trying to create a university and an incubator that mimics the ecosystems that you have there in Boston, or the incredible learning environments, um, where the idea is to open the minds of the students and to enable their learning and their discovery. It's a long way off from where you are in Boston physically, but it is our dream that when we see you and all the others who have spoken on this conference, and the fact that our team also put it together, is a sign that this ecosystem has at least is being incubated in our incubator. So we dream of a wonderful university, and really thank you for being here today and accepting our invitation to speak.
Well, yeah, no, and Samir, thank you again for inviting me. I think what you all are doing with the university and trying to build the ecosystem here is amazing and admirable and great, and I'm very happy to support it. And personally, again, thank you so much for your early support.
I just
people,
like sorry, listen. I want to say one thing after you're done.
I was just gonna say, people betting on nascent technology is what brings it into the world. Right. And it's very easy, whatever the next synthetic biology is right now is cooking up somewhere and everybody thinks it's a joke.
Right.
Right. And that there's like the people that are around for that period of time, they like feel that. And when they get it's like a oasis in the desert when they find people who say, yeah, okay, I see the vision. Like, let's try it, and you did that for us. And we'll always be thankful for it.
Yeah. I just want to say that this is to Ritika. When we worked with Jason at that first thing 8 years ago, I also asked him, will you ever help me help create a program or curriculum in synthetic biology in our university? If you remember that, we had that conversation. At that time, we weren't a university, so we couldn't decide or create curriculums that were not within the imagination of the governing system, but now we are our own university. So I will once again reach out to you to see if we can and help create that kind of stuff here. So, I mean, I just say I salute the work you guys are doing, your passion, and where you are and where you're going.
Thank you, Samir. And thanks again for the time, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Can we just all collectively agree to the fact that this was every day of the Darwin conference is another milestone in our journey so far, and it keeps getting better and better every day. What started out so well ends even better, and I don't think we could ask for anything more. But that's what we keep doing every year. We keep making it better and better every year. And I don't think any of it would have been possible without Samir sir, without speakers like Jason sir, Gustavo sir, without panelists like Geoffrey sir, without Riddle, without Byriddle. We couldn't have pulled it off without any one of you. And we are very, very, very thankful to be here and to be able to dream of a tomorrow where we all are together in one room finally, having this conference again, talking about these things at an even advanced level. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much for coming today, to all of you present here. And to the attendees, we have a special networking session for you. It will be conducted on AirMeet, and the link for the same will be displayed now in the chat box. This was on request of the attendees themselves, and we'd love to see all of you talking to each other about today, tomorrow, yesterday, about the things that interested you the most, about the visions that you have come up in these days, and I'll see you on AirMeet. All right, this will be a good night from my side. If any one of you have having a very good morning. A very good morning to you, sir or ma'am. Please have a great day ahead. This was a very good day for me as well. Goodbye for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow.